Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm going to be reviewing one of the most anticipated releases of 2020, and that is none other than A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Susanna Collins, the prequel book, or The Hunger Games 0.5, and I'm going to be talking about this book today. There is going to be a short non-spoiler section, my own general thoughts about this book, and then I'm going to jump into a couple of spoilers. I'm going to try and keep this review relatively short, but I do have a couple things that I definitely want to get into. So, A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is basically a prequel book to The Hunger Games, and it follows Coriolanus Snow, who, we all know as the evil President Snow from The Hunger Games. He is currently enrolled at the Academy, which is this sort of like prestigious school where capital children go to study, and he is in the graduate class, and this year is the 10th Hunger Games, and basically all the students in the graduate class are taking on the role of mentors in the 10th Hunger Games. Basically, Snow becomes a mentor for the 10th Hunger Games, and he gets assigned the District 12 girl. And basically, it's all about sort of like the political sort of situation at the time. It's about like how he's developing as a young adult. It's also about his relationship to like his other, fellow students, and also, to this girl that he has to mentor. And generally, it just shows his sort of like descent into power and like sort of like his ideas about the world and the Hunger Games and everything, and I can't really say more than that without spoiling anything, but it's basically kind of like a villain origin story, except I wouldn't exactly call it a villain origin story, if that makes sense. I was so excited for this book when it first came out, or when I heard that it was coming out. I have been a huge Hunger Games fan. Ever since the movies came out, basically I saw the first movie and then I absolutely loved it, and I like marathoned the books on my holiday, and I fell in love with the world. I fell in love with Katniss and Peeta, and just the story as a whole. I have been fangirling over all of the movies, and I just love them so very much. They are so dear to my heart. So when I heard that Susanna Collins was bringing out a prequel novel, I was all over it. Like everyone else, I did think that the prequel novel was going to be maybe Haymitch's story or Finnick's story, or maybe like the Hunger Games story of one of the other victors that we learn about in the Catching Fire. So I was quite surprised when I heard that it was going to be about Coriolanus Snow, and about his like experience, I guess, as a capital kid. I know that a couple people had, their own reservations about reading a prequel story with the actual villain from the Hunger Games. I wasn't too worried about it because as a psychology major, I always find it very interesting to learn about the origins of evil and like how people think the way that they do or why they think the way that they do. I definitely don't think that a villain origin story is necessarily going to make you root for the villain. I know that there are certain villains that we love to hate or even love or sympathize with, but I can assure you guys, when I was reading A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I never sympathized with Coriolanus Snow and his descent into madness and villainy. I think that while I have a couple of issues with the way that Snow's sort of like villainous development was shown in the book, I definitely do not support him, nor do I think that this book makes him out to be a more sympathetic character in the Hunger Games. So that is something that I do appreciate about this book, in that it does sort of show us both the philosophical and psychological sort of things that goes on in his head about his own opinions of the Hunger Games and like how he becomes the person that he is, that we then see in the Hunger Games, like this very power hungry, everything has to be in control kind of man, and I thought that was interesting to read about. However, unfortunately, as a whole, I was quite disappointed with this book. In particular, I found a large chunk of the book to be very boring and just non-eventful, like in any way. I totally understand that the main point of this book wasn't to give us like an action-packed, adventure-filled book like The Hunger Games are. I understand that this book was meant to be more sort of thought-provoking and philosophical and psychological in nature. And while I definitely feel like this book did present us with these ideas, and the book was definitely very thought-provoking, as a whole, I felt like the book itself could have been maybe like 200 pages shorter than it was. I feel like it was filled with kind of like just unnecessary thoughts of Snow. I found some of the dialogue to be just kind of like a bit like nah, it didn't really add anything to either the plot, nor was it really thought-provoking. But in general, I was quite happy to read the book. I definitely feel like there are a couple of things that, you know, we learn about in this book, certain origins of certain things that will definitely enhance my reading experience of reading The Hunger Games in the future. In fact, as we speak, I'm currently rereading The Hunger Games. I am on Catching Fire, and I definitely feel like, even though I don't think that this book was like necessary in the Hunger Games world, I do think that it is enriching my own experience of Katniss and her story. And in general, you can see these kind of like little like Easter egg connections between A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and some of the stuff that happens there, in particular the tribute, and also like Katniss's own story. And it definitely makes you understand, yeah, like why Snow is the way that he is, why he thinks the way that he thinks, and also why he just hates Katniss so much, I guess. So yeah, like as a whole, I am very happy that I read this book. In particular, I really loved seeing how the Hunger Games used to be held so long ago, like what the differences are. You can definitely tell that at that time people weren't really that interested in watching the Hunger Games, and so it's interesting to also see the development that is spoken about in A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes sort of like progress into what we know as the Hunger Games, which I think is very interesting. However, while I do understand Susanna Collins' sort of like way that she was trying to make Snow a villain, I do feel like it wasn't developed as well or as naturally or organically as it could have been. I feel like although we see certain sort of like little seeds being dropped here and there into like his own mind or mindset or thinking from like other characters that he encounters, I don't think that it was really until like the last couple chapters or even pages, I would say probably the last 10 pages was really when he went through the biggest character change of the whole book. And while I really loved the ending was very suspenseful and interesting, I definitely wish that we would have seen this sort of like evil development happen a bit earlier. I feel like the book was kind of lacking on that front. So while I do definitely understand where he's coming from and why he thinks the way that he thinks, I think that it could have been developed like a bit differently. That's all I'm gonna say about it. I think that if you haven't read the book yet, you should read the book yourself and make up your own mind about it. Like I said, I was very happy to read it just because I am a huge Hunger Games fan, and I feel like it definitely added to the information that I possess about like Panem and the Hunger Games and Snow and whatever. But I think that if you're not like super invested in the world, I think that this book is going to be quite boring. That's my own opinion. It is 500 pages long, which in my opinion is already quite a lot for any book. I usually feel like I read books that are usually like, I don't know, between like 350 and 450 pages. 500 pages is a quite long book, and I feel like unless the book is really gripping or very interesting or has like a lot of action happening in it or a lot of like something, I feel like a book really shouldn't be that long. That's just my opinion, but I did enjoy the book. I thought it was okay. I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads. I'm very glad that I read it. I don't think that I'm going to be rereading it anytime soon, but again, this is my own opinion. I have seen some reviews out there of people who really loved this book, who thought that this book really enriched their experience of the world, and who thought that the psychological development of Snow's villainry like made a lot of sense. And so I would also encourage you guys to go and read those reviews or watch those videos of people, because like I said, I might have a different experience of reading this book than someone else does, and like I definitely don't want to spoil anyone's like own experience of reading this book. So yeah, like go also and watch and read other reviews of people who had a different opinion to me. But yeah, that was just my own like personal opinion of reading this book. Now I'm going to get into the spoilery part of this review. So if you haven't read this book yet, or if you don't want to get spoiled, then I suggest that you don't watch this next part. But if you have read the book, or if you don't mind getting spoiled, then you can keep watching. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the romance that basically occurs between Coriolanus Snow and Lucy Gray. I thought that the romance, like when I first saw that they were going for that angle of like, oh, they're gonna fall in love with each other and whatever, I was like, ew, gross, like get away from me, that's disgusting. First of all, because he's an evil psychopathic person in the Hunger Games, or sociopathic actually better said, but second of all, I think that the power dynamics between a mentor and a tribute is very toxic, is very like, I don't know, like it's just a power dynamic that you shouldn't find in any kind of relationship, in my opinion. Just putting that out there. I definitely thought that their love or whatever was very repulsive in my opinion. I definitely do think that Snow never really loved her. He only loved like what she had to offer, which was like success for him in the capital, and then also just like general comfort when he was a peacekeeper in District 12. But it's definitely like interesting to see how he just like manipulates her. He doesn't really care about her. Like by the end of the book, he like doesn't care about her singing. He thinks that like the stories she's telling is just like they're all really boring. He like is trying not to insult her, but in his mind he's like just thinking all these like things about what she's doing and stuff. And yeah, like it's just crazy to see like that by the end of it he becomes like this outright hostile person towards her. He suddenly thinks that like she's out to get her, like oh my gosh, she's like you know, not this dainty like cute ladylike person that I thought she was. And then he basically becomes very paranoid in his mind and like then tries to kill her, which I thought was probably the most interesting part of the book from a psychological perspective. But yeah, like that relationship was very, very gross, and I'm really glad because for one moment I genuinely thought that she might end up like becoming like his wife and then like maybe like posing as like a capital woman by the end of the story. But I'm just really happy that yeah, like they didn't end up together. So there are a couple things that I did really enjoy about this book. What I found most interesting about this book was definitely seeing how the tributes were treated when they were going through the Hunger Games. Like they were starved, they weren't fed properly, they weren't taken care of. They put them in like in a zoo, which I was like, what the fuck is going on? Like when I saw that they put them in like zoo, like in a zoo and in cages, I was like, oh my goodness, this is so different than like the actual Hunger Games where they like feed them and train them and like shower them with like all this luxury before they go in. And it definitely shows, you know, the difference between how the people viewed the Hunger Games then and how people view the Hunger Games in the 74th and 75th Hunger Games. People in the capital don't really want to watch it. It's just something that they like have to do because of the Treaty of Treason. It's not like really, people aren't really interested in it. People don't even like know Snow as a mentor because it's not really broadcast either. And so what I found most interesting in this book especially was seeing how in Snow's class at the academy there's Dr. Gall, who is the game maker, who is basically discussing with her class like how they're going to improve upon the Hunger Games and how to make it like more special and more interesting for everyone. And they discuss like bedding and giving them food, like showing the tributes, the fallen tributes like in the sky or like whatever, putting a scoreboard up, you know, things like that. This is also the first year where they introduce like mentors and interviews, and you can already see that the Hunger Games is moving in the direction of like presenting these tributes as if they were on some sort of reality TV show, making it into a spectacle that is like enjoyable for the capital but also horrific for the districts. They speak about, some people also, there's like this one person I think who makes a comment that people who don't watch the Hunger Games should be like punished and stuff because they're talking about how to make it like mandatory for everyone. And it's just really scary to think that like these things that these like kids are discussing, or kids like youth people like my age, like teenagers, young adults, that all these things that they're discussing are things that actually become like the district's reality in the Hunger Games that we know. Peacekeepers are a lot more violent. They sort of like, yeah, they give them luxuries and stuff, but it's all done to make the Hunger Games like more violent and more terrifying. This is also where they start sending in like mutations or mutations or whatever, and you can definitely tell this progression or this evolution of the Hunger Games, which I thought was incredibly interesting. Something else that I found really interesting was like just getting to know the woman who is basically responsible for the Hunger Games. So what we basically learn in this book is that Dean Highbottom, who was accredited with the creation of the Hunger Games, actually never meant for the Hunger Games to happen. It was just like a school project that he did, where they worked on how they could, punish the rebels or the districts for the rebellion. And basically Dr. Gall took his assignment and then made it a reality. I already thought that Dr. Gall was some crazy woman. Like she clearly has like some crazy like stuff going on in her head. You can tell that she really thrives off of, like making the tribute suffer. She's very good at doing her job. She is just like crazy, and it's also really scary to know that basically Coriolanus Snow like gained information from her, or like was taught by her. He basically became like her, not assistant, but like apprentice, if you will, by the end of the book. So that was definitely also very interesting to see. What I really loved about this book though was definitely seeing the origin of Deep in the Meadow and the Hanging Tree. I mean, these are songs that Katniss and also District 12 know about in the Hunger Games, so it was really cool to see, yeah, Lucy Gray singing these songs, inventing these songs, crafting them. And in my opinion, it's also very crazy to think that both of these songs have their origin so closely tied to Coriolanus Snow and like his own journey. Also, I think it's really interesting to know like sort of like why Coriolanus Snow hates Mockingjay so much. So he doesn't like the idea of these things that were specifically created by the Capitol, which have now sort of like been freed, and they're sort of like rebelling against their original purpose. They're living on, they're thriving, they're surviving in an environment that they shouldn't be surviving, and he basically just doesn't like that. He thinks that like there should be order, this is chaotic, and also they take on like sort of also greater meaning because Lucy Gray really loves them. She used to like sing to them. So it's definitely very interesting to know about the like the origin of like his hatred for the Mockingjays, as well as the origin for these two songs. And I definitely feel like I said about the book as a whole, I definitely feel like these elements that we see strongly in the Hunger Games definitely take on a new and more deep meaning for me, and hopefully for everyone else who reads this book. So now I want to get into like some speculations. So my biggest speculation, and I know that like a lot of people have been talking about this, but my speculation is that Lucy Gray is the direct maternal ancestor of Katniss Everdeen. I know that there are some people who think that Maud Ivory might be the direct ancestor of Katniss Everdeen, not Lucy Gray, but my own gut feeling is that I do think that Lucy Gray is the ancestor of Katniss Everdeen, namely because, well, first of all, you have the two songs that she sings that Katniss Everdeen like knows about. I do know that Maud Ivory can like remember every song that she hears just once, and that is definitely also an indication that she might be her ancestor. But what I think is that Lucy Gray wasn't killed when Snow was chasing her. I think that she survived and eventually made her way back to District 12. We also learned that the 10th Hunger Games was basically like erased from history, like for no one to ever know about ever again, because, you know, Snow was like basically cheated. And I think that she eventually made her way back into District 12 and lived a sort of like quiet life somewhere in the seam. Something else that I think sort of like indicates that she is Katniss's relative or ancestor is that when she is in the forest, she basically digs up like Katniss roots, and she says like, you know, they're good for eating, they're like potatoes. And also in the Hunger Games, Katniss mentions that she was called Katniss like for those vegetable tubers or whatever by her father, which makes me speculate that like this definitely, like this plant definitely had some sort of meaning for her, and I didn't hear Maud Ivory ever mention Katniss, so I kind of feel like, I don't know, like I kind of just feel like Lucy Gray is her ancestor. It also makes sense just because she has this like feeling of being free, like she goes into the forest, she's the one who like wants to run away, she's the one who wants to go away, and we kind of see this like rebellious spark also in Katniss, and I just don't feel like we ever saw that with Maud Ivory, so I don't know, I'm just saying. But I definitely feel like if it's not Lucy Gray being Katniss's ancestor, then I do think that it is Maud Ivory, even though I just genuinely feel like, yeah, like kind of like a pull towards Lucy Gray being her ancestor. I also feel like the symbolism would just be so meaningful. Like they were both in the arena, they were both rebellious people, they both played with fire, if you will. One played with snakes, one played with fire. You know, they're both free, they're both very strong women, expressive, don't want to conform to the rules. They both have beautiful singing voices, you know, things like that. They have strong ties to the Mockingjays. Yeah, so I don't know if Suzanne Collins is ever going to like reveal to us who Katniss's ancestor is. I think it's Lucy Gray, but I also think that the book is definitely left at a point where you can speculate yourself, I guess. That was it for my review. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave me your opinions of A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes down in the comment section if you've read this book. I would be very interested in knowing whether you liked this book or whether you didn't like this book. If you guys love this book and disagree with my opinions on why I didn't like it so much, please leave me a comment down below. I would love to learn more about like why people Really love this book. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you guys are having a great morning, afternoon, night, evening, wherever you are in the world, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye!